When I was first called to Gateshead, I was told that a young lady had fainted. They thought she was just being dramatic, but that they should still check. Upon initial speaking with the child and observing the coldness of the aunt, the help, and the cousin store, Jane and I thought I should examine further to see if Jane needed a permanent solution. Tell me about your childhood.
My father was a poor clergyman who married my mother against the wishes of her friends. While working with the poor, my father caught typhus and my mother got it from him. They both died within a month of each other. So I was taken in by my aunt and uncle, the Reed family, and their children, John, Eliza, and Georgina. John especially likes to torment me, getting me into trouble with Mrs. Reed. She won't let me read with the other children, and she has turned the help against me too. When Bessie and Abbott learned about my parents' death, Abbott replied, if she were a nice, pretty child, one might compassionate her forlornness, but one cannot care for such little toad as that. They constantly remind me of how burdensome I am to them, and that I was less than a servant because I couldn't provide for myself. When they deem me as being a wicked child, they lock me in the red room and leave me there for hours.
What is the red room?
The room you found me in, the bed is red, the carpet is red, the pillows, the drapes. My Uncle John, the only family member who was kind to me, took his last breath in that chamber, and since that day the whole room has been dreary.
Have you always been treated this way?
My very first recollections of existence included hints of the same kind.
Based on the recollections of Jane and the clear lack of concern that Mrs. Reed holds for her niece, I recommend that Jane attend a boarding school. Jane was excited about the idea, and Mrs. Reed seemed all too enthusiastic to send her. I set up a meeting with the governor of the school, Lowood, within the next few days. I am hopeful that Jane being separated from her harsh family will be beneficial to her, and that with this change, her traumatic young childhood experiences won't overwhelm her childhood memories. However, it is quite possible that the verbal and emotional abuse that she has experienced at Gateshead will affect her in the future. For example, when I asked if she had another place that she could live, she responded that she wouldn't want to live with the poor. This shows that her constantly being told she is worthless because she is poor affects her view of the poor. I plan to check on her mental state again when she leaves Lowood to see the effects of this change. How did you leave your family at Gateshead? Were you worried it would be difficult to transition?
After you set up the meeting with the governor of Lowood, Mr. Brocklehurst, Mrs. Reed was excited for me to leave. I tried to contain my excitement because if she knew I wanted to leave too, she wouldn't have let me go. When the meeting came, Mrs. Reed knew exactly what she was going to do. When he asked if I was a good child, she answered for me, telling him that he shouldn't even discuss the topic. She took over the conversation so that by the end of it, he thought I was a wicked child, promising to tell all my teachers and classmates how horrible I was. He gave me the book Child's Guide, which was full of tales of wicked children who had died too young. She did it just to make things harder for me when I got to school, but I knew I wasn't that deceitful. If I was, I would have told her I loved her.
What was Lowood like? Did you have anybody to look up to?
My first quarter at Lowood seemed an age, but not the golden age either. The fear of failure in these points harassed me. Our clothing was insufficient to protect us from the severe cold. We had no boots and our ungloved hands became numb. Then the scanty supply of food was distressing. Miss Temple knew that we were cold and hungry, and she was too, yet she led by example in keeping our spirits up. All of the teachers were too dejected to do the same. Mr. Brocklehurst kept his promise. He had it out for me. He made me stand in front of the whole class on a stool because I dropped my board and told all the girls not to associate with me. Helen Burns was a friend of mine who easily disregarded or turned the other cheek, as she would have said, when teachers reprimanded her, but not I. I admired her until she died of consumption when we were still young adults. After Mr. Brocklehurst left, the conditions of the school improved, and so I taught for 2 years until I decided to be a personal governess. Miss Temple, who had become a friend and mother figure, had already left, and it was never again the same. Besides, I could never stay in one place too long, so then I came to Thornfield.
How do you like Thornfield?
I like it very much. I adore my pupil, Adele. She is a very intelligent student. On my way back to Thornfield from town, I actually met the master, Mr. Rochester. His horse slid on the ice and he went down with it, so I helped him back into his saddle and then I continued on my way to Thornfield, without knowing we were going to the same place. I was immediately infatuated by him, but he was gone so often and seemed fixed on a woman named Blanche. I forgot to hide my feelings. One night, Rochester's room caught on fire and I rushed to help him. When it was over, he showed little concern as to how the fire started, which I found very peculiar. He had hints of a kind nature, but could also be very cruel. When Mrs. Reed was dying, she asked me to come and see her, and when I returned, Rochester told me he was engaged to Blanche. I no longer could hold in my emotions when I told him the truth. He told me that his engagement to Blanche was fiction. He wanted to test my love for him. He then asked me to marry him, and now we are planning our wedding.
I've aged. I later heard, through the gossip, that Rochester and Jane had never married. Jane had sent mail to her uncle asking for money. A psychological need to feel equal to Rochester. Jane's uncle sent 2 of his acquaintances to tell Jane that Rochester was already married, and he revealed to her that his wife was mentally ill. and he has kept her locked up in the attic. Upon hearing this, Jane fled. I haven't heard from her since. After many years, Jane has finally agreed to have another session with me. She since has came back and married Rochester, and they now have a son together. I'm interested to see how her abusive childhood, the loss of one of her only friends and greatest mentors, and the betrayal of the man she is now married to affects her today. So what was it like after you found out about Rochester's first wife?
That night, I never thought I'd sleep, but a slumber fell on me as soon as I lay down in bed. I was transported in thought to the scenes of childhood. I dreamed that I lay in the Red Room at Gateshead, that the night was dark and my mind impressed with strange fears. May you never feel what I felt then. May your eyes never shed such stormy, scalding, heart-wrung tears as poured from mine.
Where did you go?
I took a coach to whatever place he said. He dropped me off when I ran out of money, but I left everything I brought in the coach. I saw a light of a house and followed it aslant over the hill, through a wide bog, which would have been impassable in winter and was splashy and shaking even now, in the height of summer. Here I fell twice, but as often I rose and rallied my faculties. This light was my forlorn hope. I must regain it, I thought. I was on the verge of death. I had barely eaten and traveled so far. When I got there, the servant, Hannah, turned me away, but St. John overheard the conversation and offered me shelter because he thought I was a peculiar case. I lied, and I told them my name was Jane Elliott because I didn't want to be traced back to Rochester. There I met his sisters, Mary and Diana, who I still keep in touch with today.
Well, what about St. John?
St. John was good to me. He found me a job as a mistress of a school for poor girls at Morton, and when he found that a man who was my uncle had died and left his fortune to his niece named Jane Eyre, he found out my real name from a slip of paper with my signature that he found. It turned out that he was actually my cousin, and named after my Uncle John. He loved a girl, Miss Oliver. He adored her every move. She married another man, and he turned very bitter. He asked me to marry him and go on a mission with him. I agreed to the latter, but the more and more he asked, the closer I got to saying yes to marriage. I could resist St. John's wrath. I grew pliant as a reed under his kindness. But one night he became aggressive, shouting, "My prayers are heard!" He pressed his hand firmer on my head as if he claimed me. He surrounded me with his arm almost as if he loved me. I say almost. I knew the difference, for I had felt what it was to be loved. But like him, I had now put love out of the question and thought only of duty. That's when I heard Rochester's voice calling out to me, "Jane, Jane, Jane!" And I was broken from the spell of St. John. I told him I desired to leave him, and I set out to find Rochester.
So what was different? Why were you able to forgive him?
I forgave him at the moment and on the spot. I forgave him all, yet not in words, not outwardly, only at my heart's core. But something told me I needed to leave. When he called out to me, I remembered how much I loved him and saw the difference between our relationship and St. John's, and I knew I should be with him, so I had to see him.
Well, why is he a place you can finally stay?
When I got back, I found out that Edward's first wife had set the house on fire and then jumped out of the window, killing herself. Edward went to try and save her in the house and lost his eyesight and one of his hands. I came back with my fortune from my uncle, and I care for him. It brought us closer. But I was then his vision, as I am still his right hand. He's starting to regain sight, enough to see our son when he was born. My Edward and I, then, are happy. And the more so, because those we love most are happy likewise. Well, it's bad. It's getting... I think
It's gone?
Oh, no, it's back. You see it, right?
Well,
How did you...